Greetings to one and all, and thank you for tuning in to the Mind's Eye podcast. I'm your host, Paul James Caden, and today on the show, we are going to be discussing hell in the Sufi tradition. What is hell? A lot of times we have this idea about this wrathful God who burns people alive. Their souls are alive and conscious and feeling, and God will put them in this place of torment for all of eternity. Now, for the everyday religionist who is easily indoctrinated and believes everything that is told him or passed down to him from his religious leaders and institutions, he will say, yes, this is a fact. This place of a burning, fiery hell is a real place where the sinners and the non believers go. And psychologically, I don't really think that sometimes people follow that logic through with this idea of hell and the wrath and the anger of God, because after all, those of us who are indoctrinated into thinking we belong to the right religion, the correct religion, or God's favorite or chosen religion, well, we don't really have to worry about it because chances are we're not going to go there ourselves. So that horrible, hideous, tormenting place of fire and punishment and horrendous torture is only for those very bad people, but that's not me. Now, there are some traditions in Christianity and other religions who say, well, it's not guaranteed. We will be judged by how we live our lives, and just because we wear the good guy pin on our shirt doesn't necessarily mean we're the good guys who will avoid this eternal punishment. So that might be a little bit more realistic, other than the people who say, well, I have the good guy badge and I'm absolutely not going to hell. I'm born again. I've received Jesus as my Lord. I've joined this particular religion. I believe everything I'm supposed to believe. And that's as far as it goes with them. They feel that they're covered, even though their lives do not really reflect so very much the grace of God or the love of God. So I think there's a real danger in this idea that there's a certain prayer that we can say or a certain set of beliefs that we can subscribe to, and this is our get out of jail free card, or in the sense of religion, get out of hell free card. Jesus paid it all, or God's going to overlook all the bad things I do because, I'm in the club. And that gives people license to do whatever it is they want to do because all they have to do is repent. They're covered. It's like having heavenly health insurance. Once they die, they just go right on over into the wonderful area of paradise and heaven, and it's all good. But hell, that place of awful torment and torture, is for those bad guys. It's certainly not for me. I got my get out of hell free card, so it's all good. But is this real? And is this something that has always been believed? The concept of hell is one of those religious doctrines and ideas that people used to have a lot of different ideas about back in the day, especially in the beginning of Christianity. And really, again, when Rome came along, the Roman Church, and said, we're going to define the religion for everybody, and, You're either with us or you're being tortured or being put to death, and your literature is being burned because it's heresy. They're really the ones who mixed this idea of this eternal underworld of fire with Christianity and blended that Roman paganism with the Christian tradition and then defined it for, all of the people. This is what the truth is. And, there's a lot of that exists in Christianity today, even during the Reformation. I've heard it said that, the Catholic Church, not putting Catholics down, it's fine. I was once a Catholic, and there's a lot of beautiful things in the Catholic faith. I think the Mass can be very sacred, very contemplative, and just really put you in a state of meditation and reflection and communion with God. So I'm not putting anybody down, but the Catholic Church, once it had its ideas, was kind of like the original breeding ground of a certain virus, we'll say. And then when Martin Luther broke away, though he had some different ideas, he took some of that virus with him. And then when Calvin broke away from Luther, he had some of his ideas, but he took some of the virus with him. So Christianity has really been redefined over and over and over again, but taking a lot of those central doctrines of those early councils with it since the Reformation, and we've never really gotten away from a lot of those ideas. And today they're just things that we believe. Most people, especially in the West, it's what they believe because it's what they've been raised with, and their parents have been raised with, and their grandparents have been raised with. But for the person who is a little bit more philosophical and a little bit more of a thinker, when we think about this concept of hell, there's something that doesn't sit right with us. Because we say to ourselves, okay, there's this being known as God, the supreme intelligence. And this supreme intelligence is supposed to be beyond our understanding. That really, and all religions teach this, that we really can't comprehend the totality of God and what God is. But we know He's far beyond our ways, far beyond our way of thinking. Theologians and scholars of all the religions say, God is just not love. God just does not love, but God is love personified. He is love, love itself. And so that's a very big idea to wrap our human thoughts around, this all encompassing being from which all things have originated. And one of the attributes of this being is love. He is love. And that love is so far above and beyond what we human beings know and can feel, and the compassion that we have toward others. So when we start thinking about that, and a lot of people do, they say, I don't understand this idea of hell. How could this being that is love, how could this being that is supposed to be so much wiser and better and just beyond what we could comprehend, think of such a dastardly, terrible, awful idea? And most people, and I've heard a lot of people say this, that, I'm an imperfect human being, and there's people that, you know, I literally, I feel like I hate them and everything they stand for. I can't stand these people. I consider them to be my enemies. And I wish them, you know, no good, in this world. But they will all say, as much as I dislike that person, I could never, even if I had the power to do so, put them in this incinerating fire where they will be screaming and wailing and in excruciating agony and pain for all of eternity. There's very, very few people, if they think about it and you talk to them, they'd say, no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to my worst enemy, literally. So how could God do this thing if there are imperfect human beings, including myself, that would never, ever come up with such an idea, let alone subject somebody to such a horrendous amount of torture and pain for eternity? Even if that person did, live the most horrible life and did the most, insidious things, is an eternity of burning alive a fair punishment for the horrible crimes that someone and atrocities that they committed in 20 years of life, 30 years of life, 50, 60, even if they live into their 70s or 80s and they were a very bad person? Is that equal justice? Is there a time when too much is too much? So let's examine this idea of hell from the Sufi tradition. And I'm reading from a website here. I'm going to read some of the snippets. This website is called Sufi Ways, and the title of this particular article is Salvation, Heaven and Hell, the Quranic Viewpoint from the Sufi perspective. And this starts right off this article by saying, Heaven and hell are not places. They are states or conditions of the soul's existence in the life after death. Their description in the Quran are visual representations of an inner fact, i.e., their character. Hell, in the words of the Quran, is God's kindled fire which rises above the hearts. In other words, this fire originates in a person's inner consciousness. This clearly alludes to the spiritual nature of the fire and a person's belated realization of wrongdoing. It is a painful realization of one's failure as a person that arises within one's own consciousness, not imposed by an external agency. Now, I'd like to pause right there because this reminds me of something that I've come across in near-death experiences over the years that I've studied this subject. And I remember, and this put a mark on my thinking when it came to the idea of hell. I remember it was the toward maybe the latter part of the 90s. I read about this one near-death experience where this woman was very depressed. She had a lot of anxiety. There was a lot going on in her life. She was angry. She was bitter. And one day she just decided to take her own life. And I believe There was some kind of medication that she overdosed on, and she ended up flatlining. Until someone found her, called 911, and they were eventually able to revive her. But she said that she found herself in this place, and it was a very dimly lit area. And there were all these souls, all of these people that were just wandering about, clamoring and talking to themselves and weeping and wailing. And she realized that all of these souls were in this place, and they were almost like they were unaware of one another. They were all focused in on themselves, in the pain, in the anger, in the hatred, and all of the things that they felt in their earthly lives that they were so focused on and concentrated on. And she said that she realized that this was a place where we didn't escape our negative feelings or our hatred or our pain or our self-loathing. But rather, in her words, she said, in the afterlife, we are ultra focused upon it, living in the hell of our own making. Now, she says that she perceived that it was possible for these souls to break out of that state of being, but many would not. They were actually content to keep rehearsing that state of mind, that state of heart, that bitterness, whatever it was that landed them in this place. They were actually, and not content, but, uh, content to be perseverated on all of that pain and negativity. And of course, eventually she was revived. She came back. She found herself back in her body, and she realized that, uh, this was not a way out to take one's own life. And I think the idea, if I remember correctly, she, wasn't necessarily dealing with depression, or any kind of psychological illness that caused her to commit suicide. If I recall correctly, she did it to spite her husband because she felt that her husband didn't love her, that, she didn't matter. I guess he was being unfaithful, and he just put her in this really bad state of mind. And it was pretty much, well, I'll show him. I'll just check out of this world, and he'll know this is his fault. And she found herself in this place where, people were just walking around unaware of one another, mumbling and crying, and just turned so inward on all this negativity that they had in their lives and refused to let go of before and even after they passed away. I remember another near-death experience where the person was in the hospital having some kind of procedure, and they flatlined. And this person said, he had the out-of-body experience. He went through the tunnel, but he found himself in what he explained as being a dark and dreary cave. And he was afraid to leave this place. And now and then he would see movement outside of the cave, but he would hide in the darkness and the shadows and be petrified who was outside of the cave. Who was going to come for him? Were they going to hurt him in some way? And it said, during this X amount of minutes that he had flatlined and was having this experience, when he came back, he said he felt like he was there for hundreds of years and it was only a few minutes. That he was just in this cave, afraid, filled with fear. And eventually this radiant angel stepped into the cave, and the man was petrified. He fell to the ground. He begged and pleaded that he wouldn't be tormented or hurt. And the angel told him that no one there was going to hurt him. That he was in this place of darkness and fear because that's where he felt he deserved to be. And that's where he felt he needed to be. That he was never a very religious or spiritual man, and he feared the concept of God. He feared the concept of the afterlife. And he also didn't feel that he deserved to stand in the presence of God. He was bad. And so he deserved hell and punishment. So it was his own state of mind and consciousness that we're seeing here that the Sufis are talking about that actually landed him in this place. And the angel, kind of in short, gave him a bit of a pep talk and, told him that he was free to leave the darkness of this cave. And when he did, he found that he was, pulled back into the light down through the ceiling and back into his physical body. So there's a lot of near-death experiences that seem to confirm this idea of the hellish experience being one that reflects the state of mind and consciousness of the person who went there. It's interesting that this article goes on to talk about states of mind, both positive and negative. And in one paragraph says, imagine this painful condition of soul's existence with utter loneliness and bitter desolation, the torment of unceasing frustration, the darkness and despair, intensified beyond anything imaginable in this world, and you will know, however vaguely, what is meant by hell. And so they're talking about here those states of mind and consciousness that are very heavy, very negative, very dark. Intensify them, 1,000, a million fold, and you may get an idea of what hell is like. And so the Sufi tell us, and this is a belief too. I mean, there are a lot of folks in the Islamic religion who believe, as the Christians do, that hell is this eternal burning. But for lack of a better way of putting it, they're generally folks who don't have a great education about their own religion, what it has taught over, the centuries, what is said in their own holy book. And so, they go by what is passed down to them by their religious leaders. But the more educated, moderate Muslims who want to educate themselves about the religion, who want to break away from the superstition, they understand this to be a fact as well. And these are not necessarily mystics. And so what is it that they know? What is it that they understand that the Sufi also understand and that some of the early Christians understood? And it is this, going back to the article, and it says, hell, therefore, as conceived by the Quran, is not a pit of everlasting torture inflicted by a revengeful God. It is a metaphor for a corrective experience which may make a hardened soul once more sensitive to the cool breeze of divine grace. This concept is explained by the Quran, where it speaks of the fire of hell as a person's friend, the only process by which the soul may be purified and redeemed. However, this process is not imposed by an external agency. It arises from within a person's own consciousness. And so we see in this Sufi tradition how it takes us back to that internal life. What's going on inside of you? What's going on inside of your mind and your thoughts and your emotions? What's going on within your own heart? This is why Sufism is called the way of the heart. And it looks to annihilate or get rid of the ego, or all these resentments and angers and getting so caught up in the things of this world, and it affects us in such a negative way. And boy, I wish that guy would die. Man, if I had my way, I'd kill that group of people. Man, I really hate that guy. I hate that woman. We become vengeful, we become greedy, and that's all symptoms of the ego. And once we get rid of those things, we get rid of the ego, the symptoms go with it. And we have a pure connection with the divine. Our thoughts are more peaceful. Our hearts are more settled. Our hearts are more filled with divine love and peace. As I said in Wednesday's show, we begin to blend with eternity, blend with the divine now, here, in this world. And speaking of heaven, this article says from the Sufi perspective, heaven is a metaphor for the joy of victory over the forces of disintegration. It is the existence of the soul in an inner state of unimaginable happiness in the afterlife. Imagine the most joyous sensations, beauty, love, consciousness of fulfillment, perfect peace and harmony, and you have, however vague, the idea of what it is meant by heaven. In a nutshell, this is beautifully mentioned in the Quran in the expression, the human being who has attained inner peace. But see, as far as this hellish state is concerned, again, what many of the early Christians believed as well, and Muslims, that hell was not an eternal punishment, that the soul had this eternal journey that it went on, and that hell was temporary. One could be redeemed, one could exit hell after a time. After certain lessons are learned, certain states of mind and consciousness have been dealt with and annihilated within the soul. The Quran speaks of a person remains in hell until God calls them out. And it also refers to a soul will remain in hell for an A. And that word A in the Arabic means for a designated period of time. So hell is not necessarily eternal in the Islamic or Sufi traditions. And if we really do our homework, we find various religions and even a lot of mainstream religions that people practice today in the Abrahamic faiths. Going back, there was a time when many believed that that was so. That if the soul didn't learn its lessons in this life, it would learn them in the next. And we had this old idea that if someone was greedy taking from others and being stingy and hoarding and didn't care about the welfare of others, and they'll step on other people and hurt other people to get theirs. Well, this person, their hell would be a place that they would go to where they're constantly striving to get theirs, but they never get it, even though they are consumed with this greed and this want and this have to get these material things or whatever it is I'm after. But like the carrot on the string, it always eludes them. And they live in that sense of bitterness and desperation and greed until they finally realize, what am I doing? I've lived my life all wrong. I did this on earth and I'm doing it 1,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold here in the afterlife. And I'm not able to obtain those things that I think I need and want. I was wrong. And then God will take them out of that place because that soul has purified itself. It has begun the journey of salvation and rehabilitation. And we find thoughts like this everywhere in many different traditions. Some souls will go to a very bad place, but it's not physical torment, it is emotional torment. That fire burning in the consciousness of the soul that torments it until it realizes the thing that torments it is not the thing that is needed and not the thing that is important. And then little by little, it will begin to climb those rungs of the ladder into the paradise and the bliss of the divine presence. So, this is not a new idea. This is something that has been around. It's around now in various religions. It was talked about and thought about by the early Christians before the religion was defined by Rome. But make no mistake, it's not that like we can freewheel through life and do whatever we want to do, because a soul can remain in these hellish states for a very, very long time, thousands, millions of years. And it is possible, I would suppose, that some would be there for eternity, because the Quran speaks of that too, that there will be those people who are companions of the fire who will be there forever. Souls that will never change, souls that will never progress. They will drink of their own boiling water for all eternity, and it will scorch their inner being. So don't ever look at such a thing as, well, hey, if it's not eternal, then I'm just going to, do whatever I want to do. Because that might be the state of mind and consciousness you take into the afterlife with you. And you will actually spend all of eternity telling yourself in this place of hell and torment, I can keep doing this because I can get out anytime I want. I can always change my mind, but you never will. And you'll find yourself being one of those souls that are a companion of the fire, literally for all eternity, that you never come out. So we don't want to play games with this. And we also must get beyond this notion that everybody must be a certain religion or be the religion that we are in order to obtain heaven. Because the way of the Sufi tells us, and the article goes onward, that uh, now the Muslim may feel that Islam is the best religion and might think that it would be a good thing if all humanity became Muslim. On the contrary, as explained by the Quran, that is not the will of God. And it does say in the Quran that if God was willing, he could make all people belong to a certain religion. All people believe a certain way. But it also says in the Quran that those of the Torah, the Nazarenes or the Christians, and those of other religions will have their reward with God. So the Quran certainly does speak of people of other faiths who are righteous, who are good, who are doing the right internal work, and they will have their reward of happiness and bliss in the hereafter. So don't judge people by externals. Don't look at people and say, well, they're not the same religion as me, or, well, they're the same religion by title, but they don't practice the way I do and believe the way I do. So they're wrong and they're going to hell and God is displeased with them. That is not your place to say. It is not your place to judge. God alone is the judge of each and every soul. And we must remember that eternity starts now. This is why in the Sufi tradition or any mystical tradition, we begin to purify our hearts. We begin to purify our lives and our inner being now. This is part of the journey now. Blending with eternity now. Becoming one with God now. Starting to do the important work now. Not when I die. Not thinking when I die, suddenly I'm a perfected soul going to rise into the bliss of paradise. No, there's work to be done. And dare I say, the Christian who thinks Jesus dying for his sins meant that the inner work is all done and taken care of by Jesus' work on the cross, that person is thinking such things in ignorance because it doesn't work that way. And even the early Christians knew that. So this isn't a playground where we just do whatever we want to do, and then when we die, it's all good based on what we believed. That's a very hocus pocus, very ignorant way to view religion, the afterlife, what is the meaning of life, and it is not realistic. It's like me saying, well, I'm going to do the inner work for me and my wife. I can't do that. My wife, whoever, everybody in the world is responsible for their own inner work. No one can do that for you. And we just can't say, well, I didn't steal, I didn't lie, I didn't commit adultery, I didn't do all these things, so I'm good to go, but everything else was completely out of alignment in our lives. And we're going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast. What does it really mean to follow something like the Ten Commandments? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Don't commit adultery. What does that really mean? Are these just surface actions that we refrain from and that gets us a one-way ticket into the paradise of God? Or is there more to that? Is it linked somehow to this inner purification process that we're talking about right now? And that's something we're going to talk about in probably one of the shows next week. But for now, let's contemplate this idea of hell. It's not a new one. It's not a new one in Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam, and other religions throughout time. Many traditions have and still do think and believe that hell is a temporary state. It is one that the soul can progress from in learning and purification, but it may take a very long time. And again, so it's not anything we want to, play games with. And maybe we want to think a little bit more about this being called God. What would he really be like if he is love, just not a being that loves, but is love, and that love is far beyond our comprehension? Can we really sit back and play all these doctrinal games with, the idea of God? Or is God bigger than our doctrines and our dogmas and our religious rules and ponderings? And what does all this mean to the inner work that you and I have to do to start that process of entering into eternity now in this world? I could go on, but I see I'm already running a bit overtime in this particular show, and I don't want to keep you too long. So I thank you for listening, and we're going to talk more about this in upcoming shows, different angles, getting an idea of what this inner purification process is, what it means, what it looks like, familiarize ourselves with it a little bit, and maybe start that process, uh, while we're still here. Start doing the important work, following the way of the heart or the way of the mystic. So, again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. Stay safe, stay well out there, everyone. Have a blessed weekend, and I'll see you next time here on the Mind's Eye Podcast.